Let's start with a simple but unsettling question. Do we actually want happiness? Imagine this. You've won the lottery. Every problem seems solved. You never have to work another day in your life. You buy your dream house, travel anywhere you like, and surround yourself with comfort. For a while, it feels incredible. But after the excitement fades, a strange restlessness creeps in. You start noticing little things to complain about. You sabotage your own peace, chase unnecessary conflicts, or even invent new problems. Why? This paradox is at the heart of Fyodor Dostoevsky's work. His novels don't just tell stories. They are psychological X-rays of the human soul. They show us something uncomfortable. Maybe what we say we want, like peace and happiness, isn't what we actually desire deep down. Maybe, as he suggests, humans crave struggle, agency, and even suffering itself. But where did these haunting insights come from? To understand, we must begin with Dostoevsky's own life, which reads almost like one of his novels, full of tragedy, suspense, near-death experiences, and profound transformations. Born in Moscow in 1821, Dostoevsky grew up in a family that lived within the grounds of a hospital for the poor. His father was a doctor, and young Fyodor saw firsthand the suffering of patients, alcoholics, beggars, and people dying of diseases. These impressions would never leave him. Then tragedy struck. His mother died when he was a teenager. His father soon followed, under mysterious circumstances rumored to have been murdered by his own serfs. Imagine the psychological impact of that. A young man losing both parents in quick succession, with the added suspicion of violent death hanging in the air. Trauma became his earliest teacher. Although trained as a military engineer, Dostoevsky's true passion was literature. His first novel, Poor Folk 1846, was hailed as Russia's first great social novel. Critics predicted he would become a literary star. But his next few works failed, and his career stumbled. Worse, his reckless gambling and poor money management drove him into deep financial debt, a theme that would later appear vividly in his novels. In 1849, everything changed. Dostoevsky joined a small intellectual group that discussed utopian socialism. It wasn't exactly violent revolution, more like political philosophy, but in Tsarist Russia, that was enough to be arrested. He was sentenced to death. Picture this scene. Dostoevsky and other prisoners are tied to stakes, facing a firing squad. The soldiers lift their rifles. The command is about to be given. Dostoevsky has seconds left to live. He thinks, what if these are the last moments I will ever experience? But then, at the very last second, a messenger arrives. The Tsar had mercifully commuted their sentence to forced labor in Siberia. The execution was a cruel trick, a staged mock execution. That moment became the axis of his life. Later, Dostoevsky would write that, in those final seconds, he felt an overwhelming clarity about existence, how precious every second of life is, and how fragile everything we take for granted truly is. Imagine the shock of being dead and then alive again in the span of minutes. The punishment was brutal. For years of hard labor in freezing Siberia, chained alongside criminals, murderers, thieves, and outcasts, he slept on wooden planks, ate rotten bread, and was treated worse than an animal. But it was here, in this hellish environment, that Dostoevsky began to understand the raw, unpolished soul of humanity. He saw men stripped of status, wealth, and pretense. Later, he would say, to live without hope is to cease to live. And yet, in Siberia, he learned to find meaning, even in suffering. When he returned from exile, he was no longer the same man. Gone were the youthful dreams of utopian perfection. Instead, his writing became focused on the inner contradictions of the human soul, the pull between freedom and security, faith and doubt, reason and irrationality. And this is where his philosophy truly begins. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky introduces us to the infamous underground man, a bitter, self-destructive narrator who rants against society. One of his most striking points is this: human beings do not actually want perfect happiness. Even if you gave people every luxury, every comfort, they would deliberately sabotage it, just to prove their freedom. Why? Because suffering, struggle, and agency are inseparable from being human, he writes. Man only likes to count his troubles. He doesn't calculate his happiness. This might sound dark, but let's test it in real life. Think about times when everything was going smoothly in your life. Did you suddenly find yourself picking fights, obsessing over small problems, or feeling strangely restless? That's the underground man at work. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies on hedonic adaptation show that humans quickly return to a baseline of dissatisfaction after positive events. We adjust to pleasure, but pain always finds a way back into focus. Nietzsche, writing a few decades later, echoes this idea. Man does not strive for happiness. Only the Englishman does. What he meant was that life is not about comfort, but about the creation of meaning, even if that involves suffering. Socrates, too, in a different way, suggested that suffering through ignorance, and then questioning oneself, was the only path to wisdom. Pain, whether physical or existential, is the furnace that forges deeper self-knowledge. So Dostoevsky's insight is timeless. To be human is not to escape suffering, but to wrestle with it, and perhaps even find meaning through it. Another core theme. Dostoevsky believed that human freedom is more important than comfort. This is powerfully dramatized in the brothers Karamazov through the parable of the Grand Inquisitor. Here's the story. Christ returns to earth during the Spanish Inquisition. The people recognize him and flock to him, but the Grand Inquisitor has him arrested. Why? Because Christ gave humanity freedom, and the church decided people don't actually want freedom, they want bread, miracles, and authority to tell them how to live. The Inquisitor tells Christ, "We corrected your work." People would rather give up their freedom and be slaves to authority if it means they don't have to suffer. Dostoevsky's warning is clear. Systems that promise to eliminate suffering, whether political utopias, technological progress, or even certain religious institutions, often come at the cost of freedom. And without freedom, humans are reduced to piano keys, playing notes of happiness in a predictable tune. Kant, writing before Dostoevsky, argued something similar in his essay, What is Enlightenment? He claimed that immaturity is when people let others think for them. True freedom is the courage to use one's own reason, even if it means facing difficulty. But Dostoevsky goes further. Reason itself is limited. Raskolnikov, the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, tries to live by pure reason. He believes that killing an old pawnbroker is justified, because the money could be used for greater good. Rationally, the math works out. One bad life sacrificed for many good ones. But after the murder, Raskolnikov's mind unravels. He is tormented by guilt, paranoia, and despair. His rational system collapses under the weight of his irrational humanity. This illustrates Dostoevsky's critique. Reason alone cannot capture the complexity of human nature. We are not machines that operate on logical formulas. We are beings of conscience, contradiction, and mystery. Here, we can compare him with Socrates, who believed reason and dialogue could lead us closer to truth, but also admitted that I know nothing. Nietzsche, on the other hand, warned that rational systems, whether scientific or moral, often conceal a deeper will to power. Modern neuroscience supports this too. Research shows that humans make many decisions emotionally before rationalizing them afterward. We are less like computers and more like storytelling animals, constantly weaving logic to justify our deeper impulses. Think about social media. Platforms claim to maximize our happiness and connection, but in reality, the more they optimize, the more restless and dissatisfied we become. The perfect feed never feels perfect. It makes us crave, compare, and despair. Think about technology. Every innovation promises to solve problems, yet creates new ones. Cars solved distance, but gave us pollution and traffic. Smartphones solved communication, but gave us distraction and addiction. Dostoevsky would say, "This is inevitable. Human attempts to create utopia always backfire, because they forget the irrational nature of humanity." Dostoevsky forces us to confront three hard truths. Suffering cannot be eliminated. It is fundamental. Freedom is more important than happiness. Reason has limits. We are not purely logical beings. And yet, he doesn't leave us in despair. Instead, he points toward an alternative, embracing suffering consciously, choosing freedom even when it's hard, and living authentically, rather than hiding behind rational systems. So what does all this mean for us living in a world full of technology, consumerism, and endless promises of happiness? Lesson 1. Don't chase perfect happiness. Happiness is not a permanent state. If you expect life to always feel good, you will be perpetually disappointed. Instead, accept suffering as part of the process. Ask yourself, how can I use this struggle to grow? Lesson 2. Value freedom over comfort. Be wary of systems, whether political, technological, or even personal, that promise to solve all your problems. They often trade away your freedom. True growth comes from making your own choices, even if they lead to mistakes. Lesson 3. Trust more than reason. Reason is powerful, but it's not the whole picture. Listen to your conscience, your emotions, your intuition. Dostoevsky reminds us that life is not a math problem, it's a mystery. Actionable takeaways. Next time you face a setback, don't just ask, how can I fix this? Ask, what can this suffering teach me? When you feel restless, even in comfort, don't panic. Recognize it as part of being human. Practice freedom in small ways. Choose for yourself instead of following every trend, every algorithm, every authority figure. Finally, accept contradiction. You don't need to have perfect certainty to live meaningfully. As Dostoevsky, Socrates, and Nietzsche all remind us, embracing uncertainty is the first step toward wisdom. Dostoevsky once wrote, "Man is a mystery. If you spend your entire life trying to puzzle it out, then don't say you've wasted your time." Maybe that's the real message. Life isn't about reaching some final answer or perfect happiness. It's about wrestling with the questions, embracing the contradictions, and finding meaning even in the darkest places. So let me leave you with this. Would you still choose to live if you knew suffering could never be eliminated? Because Dostoevsky believed that saying yes to life, despite the suffering, is the truest form of human freedom.